I'm very anxious that in our studies of the book of Revelation, we all obtain an overview, a good overview of the book. You know, from at the beginning, we were constantly going back over and looking at the basic outline of the book, and it's very important, in my opinion, that we get that big picture. One of the reasons why Revelation is so difficult is because there are so many small pieces, and most of the interpretations that we hear about Revelation, they focus on those little small pieces as individual units by themselves. And you know, they are not really fit into a big picture. But I believe that once you grasp the big picture, you have a tool that will help you to always be able to approach any of the different parts of the book and have a fairly good understanding where it fits in. So, as always, I want to repeat that I think it's very important that I make the point over and over again that when it comes to the book of Revelation, I'm not trying to be an infallible interpreter. I'm not trying to do this. What I'm trying to do is to share the principles of interpretation that I believe God has taught me. I say I believe God has taught me. I've been in the school of Christ for many years, and I believe He has taught me certain principles that have helped me to have a solid understanding of the book that I believe is a reasonable approach. I'm being very careful of what I'm saying because I know I'm not infallible. I know I'm not a prophet. I know I can be wrong, but I believe that the principles that we are using to approach the book are good principles. And I believe that, of course, I believe that generally speaking, we're heading in the right direction. So that's what I will say. I don't think there's anybody in this world who understands everything in the book. And if anybody says so, I'll be very suspicious of that person because I don't believe it. But I believe that little by little, step by step, God is helping us to understand quite a bit of it. And if we get the broad picture, is what I'm saying. So I really should so here is the overall idea behind the book of Revelation. And maybe I'm going to bring up the Bible. Maybe I should just use the Bible as always as the basis for this presentation. All right. So the overall theme that we are looking at, we're basing it on a certain principle. And the principle is that the book of Revelation is dealing with the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord. There are many places in the Bible that speaks of the day of the Lord. And I could just look at one of them very quickly. In the book of Joel, for example, in Joel chapter 2, it says that in verse 1, blow ye the trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. He says, for the day of the Lord cometh. And it goes on to describe in the rest of this chapter what the day of the Lord is like. There are many places, as I said, that speaks of this day of the Lord. If you go to the book of Malachi, it says in chapter 4, it says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So there is this period in the Bible that is referred to as the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So the basic premise on which we're approaching the book of Revelation is a premise that Revelation is dealing with the day of the Lord. It is, I believe it is given other titles in the Bible, like for example, it's the time of the judgment. It's dealing with one aspect of the judgment, what I refer to as a pre-Advent judgment. So that's the overall picture. The book of Revelation is dealing with the day of the Lord. The second thing that I wonder if I should write it down. I probably should. Let me write it down, and it's always easy for us to follow when all right, that's premise number one. Revelation is dealing with the day of the Lord. Let me take off the highlighting. All right. Revelation is dealing with the day of the Lord. The second thing that we want to look at, number two, is that Revelation is the book of Revelation is basically the judgment of two kingdoms. The focus of Revelation is the judgment of two kingdoms. Now, when I put these highlights on the board, what I would like is that if there's any point that I'm going to put up here that anybody does not understand, I would like you to ask me about it afterwards, okay? Let's discuss it together because I want to be sure that we are understanding. It's about the judgment of the two kingdoms. Number three, part A, or part one, let me say part A. Part A is chapters 4 to 11. And it deals with the judgment of Christ's kingdom. Point number 4, part B, is from chapters 12 to 19, and it deals with the judgment of the beast kingdom. All right. Point number 5. The 7 seals contains the history of the kingdom of Christ. Maybe that I could put that a little better. It contains the record that is examined in the judgment. Maybe that's a better way to put it, but I'll leave it as it is because we can follow that a little better. Number 6, the history of the beast. The history of the beast kingdom. I don't know how to put this. This is already what we looked at in part 4. The judgment of the beast kingdom. The history of the beast kingdom is in chapters 12 to 19. I said that already, but I'm going to repeat it so we have an equivalent of what we see in chapter 5. All right, so this is kind of the basic outline. Number 7 is that both sections contain basically the same history, just explained in different ways. All right, maybe I'm going to leave that like that for the moment, and I'm going to ask us to look at this. And I'm not seeing everybody because I'm in this mode. I can't see everybody. So if you want to unmute your mic and to ask a question about anything, I can't see your unmuted mic, so you'll just have to make a sound, okay? So is there any part of what I put on the screen that anybody would like more clarification about? Is there any part of it that you don't understand? Just unmute your mic and say so if that is the case. If not, that will be remarkable, but that will be that will be a good thing, I suppose.
The day of the Lord, is that the first coming of Christ? I mean, the second coming of Christ, or is that third coming?
Okay, Brother Lad, I don't, the day of the Lord, I don't understand this to be simply the coming of the Lord. If we go back to the books of like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel, Malachi, and some of these minor prophets, what we see is that the day of the Lord involves the coming of the Lord, but it is more than this. The day of the Lord involves the pre-Advent judgment, going into the last crisis where the living church is examined, the judgment of the living, we would say, and it goes through the time of trouble right up to the coming of Christ, and it may extend even beyond. So I believe that the book of Revelation, the entire spectrum of the book of Revelation is what the Bible refers to as the day of the Lord. Not a single 24-hour day, but a day, well, it seems more likely that it's a day that covers 1,000 years. So the day of the Lord, as Peter says, a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years in his sight. So I believe the day of the Lord, the way we had looked at it at the beginning when we were just introducing the topic, I had used this analogy that we sometimes say, we use a phrase, a human phrase where we say every dog has his day. Now I hate to use that analogy when I'm talking about God, but it helps us to understand. When we say every dog has his day, it means that we are saying, my time is coming. You've had the time to parade yourself and exalt yourself and do as you please and to badmouth me and to harass and harm my people. But my day is coming. In other words, we're not talking about a day in the sense of a literal day period of time, 24 hours, but it means my time is coming. So the day of the Lord is the day when God again steps into human history and once again begins to display his involvement in humanity, his judgments upon humanity, and his involvement in concluding the events that bring this age to an end. So it's the day of the Lord. And as I said, it doesn't just cover a 24-hour period, but it covers a span of time that takes in many years. So I'm really saying that the book of Revelation covers this. That is why John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. He was not saying I was in the Spirit on a Sunday or I was in the Spirit on a Saturday. What he's saying is that through the infilling of the Spirit, I was taken in the Spirit into that period of time that is called the day of the Lord or the Lord's day. So that's how I understand it, Brother Lad.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, is there anybody else? All right, let me just express that I'm very happy that there's no other question, because you know what it means? If I'm to believe this, what it means is that so far as we have been going through the book of Revelation, you have been understanding and you have a fairly good idea of what I just shared. Now, this is the basic outline of the book of Revelation. It's the pattern of the book of Revelation. And once you get this, you have a template that you can work with. Now, of course, there are other details now that become a little bit more complicated. But once you understand the pattern, it's like when I was doing biology. You know, one of the things I remember about doing biology in high school, they talked about the circulatory system, the skeletal system, the nervous system. And the way I was taught in school as a third former, a little boy in third form, it was kind of like jumbled. I never understood the overall structure of the human body. So when you talk about these systems, I couldn't put them in their proper place, and it made biology a little more difficult for me, human biology. Now today, when you talk about the skeletal system, I understand the structure of the human body, how where the circulatory system fits in, the respiratory system. I understand how all these things come together to make a complete person. So I understand if for example, if your skeletal system goes haywire, you're going to be crippled. If your respiratory system is giving trouble, you're going to be in danger of dying from being unable to breathe. If your circulatory system is not functioning well, you're going to get a stroke or you're going to get a heart attack. So if your nervous system is not working properly, you're going to start getting tingling feeling in your hands and your feet. So once you understand how the thing works together, it's easy to fit everything in its place. So I'm saying The Bible is like this, and the prophecies of Revelation are particularly like this. So now that we have an overall view, then it's easier to fit the parts in place. So in part 1 of the book, where it deals with the judgment of Christ, we look at the seven seals, and we look at the history of the Christian church, and we see that just before seal number 7, you have the final manifestation of the church of Christ, the kingdom of Christ, which is the 144,000. And after the 144,000 are sealed, then you have the seven trumpets, which is the 7 last plagues. So that brings us basically to the end of the history of the Christian church, and Jesus comes again in chapter 11. So from there, we moved on to chapter 12, and we saw the development of Satan's kingdom. We saw Satan trying to destroy the kingdom of Christ with the woman and the man child, and we saw how he goes to make war against God's people in the last days. So it goes quickly to the end time crisis, because really the book is about the day of the Lord. So even though we get a little background history where we are told about the woman and the beast, the dragon persecuting the woman into the wilderness, the main point is the day of the Lord, the last days. So we quickly move on to the 2 beasts and the crisis that they bring up on the earth. So there's the first beast, and then there's the 2-horned lamb-like beast, and they create a crisis that we refer to as the mark of the beast. This mark of the beast crisis, when it comes, it is accompanied by the greatest work of preaching that the world has ever seen. When God describes it, he says that 3 angels fly through the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach. So what we can see is that the approach of the mark of the beast crisis, it does something for God's people. Okay? If we read the Bible, Viv, I'm gonna if we read the Bible carefully, what we see is that the mark of the beast crisis, it does something. It brings about a great change among God's people, because it says that when the crisis comes, it says, I saw another angel flying through the midst of heaven. Look at it in context and you'll see chapter 13 comes, then chapter 14 comes with the flying of the 3 angels. And the angel says, the hour of God's judgment has arrived. So what we're looking at is that the time has come for God to split the earth into 2 camps, 2 classes. The time has come for God to separate the sheep from the goats. The time has come for God to reveal to the universe those who have the oil in their lamps and those who don't. If you go back to the parables of Jesus, it's the same thing that we see in the parable of the 10 virgins, where it says, at midnight, there is a cry made. So the midnight cry corresponds to the awakening of God's people when the mark of the beast crisis comes. It says they arise and trim their lamps, and their lamps begin to burn brightly. It's the same thing that happens. You see that the 3 angels fly, and now the preaching of the gospel to all nations takes place in a rapid moment of time. This is why, you know, I say something. I always say this, and the Lord knows it is true, and you all know it is true. I can't make blood out of stone, all right? I can't make blood out of stone. That means I can't create what God has not created. None of us can do it. I keep saying me because I am the person sitting in the teaching seat. But none of us can do it. We cannot make an issue where God has not made an issue. So, you know, some years ago, a certain person came to me and said that something was the final crisis. It was the mark of the beast, and that we are at the end. And I didn't believe it, because I looked at the prophecy and I could not see where what was being said was true to the prophecy. And the person said, well, it is. And the person was insistent. And I said, well, if what you are saying is true, we will see, because the Bible says that when the mark of the beast comes, 3 angels fly through the midst of heaven, and there's a great awakening among God's people. I said, let us see if this happens. And this person in particular tried to create this great awakening. Him alone, poor thing, tried to create this great awakening. And after a few weeks, he grew weary, wore out, and things went back to normal. And that's what I'm saying when I say I can't make blood out of stone. One thing I've learned, and I have been in the camp of those who tried to make things happen, because at one time I thought that I would be able to finish the work. I was so simple. I thought, I'm going to finish the work, all right? I'm going to be Elijah. I had these ideas when I was young and idealistic, and I'm not saying it is wrong to have this desire, but I'm saying it was based on ignorance, because you can't create the day of Pentecost. I'm going to mute everybody. There's somebody there who is your mic is making noise. You can't create the day of Pentecost. You can't create the birth of Christ. You can't create the death of Christ. You can't create the Day of Atonement. You can't create the Feast of Tabernacles. God has a plan for what he's doing. And at the time, in the fullness of time, God's plans fall into place. And we might have I remember, Ellen White saying that we have delayed the coming of the Lord. There is some truth mingled with error that can be misunderstood, because is there an appointed time for the Lord to come? Did God really plan for the world to continue for 6,000 years? And if we have delayed the coming of the Lord, then maybe he should have come at 5,000 years. But if that had happened, all the prophetic symbolism would have fallen by the wayside. It would have meant nothing. So God has a plan. And so what I'm saying is that a part of that plan is that he has a way to awaken the sleeping virgins. At midnight, there's a cry made. Who makes the cry? I don't think it's David Clayton. I don't think it's Ian Baxter. I don't think it's Kip Wallace or Brother Matthew. No, we're not the ones who give that midnight cry. That midnight cry comes from God, and it comes from heaven, and it says, behold, the bridegroom cometh. Something is to happen to electrify, to galvanize God's people into action, because it is so unmistakable that they know that this is it and they cannot miss it. And when that happens, you have the awakening of the foolish virgins. This is what you see all over the scriptures. There's a point in time when something happens. And in the prophecies that we are looking at, it says that the three angels fly when the mark of the beast is instituted. So the next thing that we see happening is that this great preaching work takes place. And this is referred to as the harvesting of the earth. Okay, you look at Revelation 14, you see somebody with a sickle, he harvests the earth. And after the harvest takes place, then there's the 7 last plagues in Revelation 16. It's following a logical, sequential story form. And that's where we stopped the last time, because now, in the middle of this, in the middle of the 7 plagues and the judgment, God stops. He stops the narrative and he says, hold on. Let me show you something special. I'm going to show you the judgment of the woman. I'm going to show you the judgment of the great whore, because she's going to get some special treatment. So I'm going to take you there and give you some background information. And that's where we are at the moment.